I never meant to become the kind of woman who tells strangers about her marriage on the internet. But at some point, the silence in our apartment got so loud that it started to sound like a confession. When I met Eric, he was all quick smiles and steady hands. He worked in finance, the sort of job that meant he wore shirts that smelled faintly of dry cleaning and stress. I was 26 then, working in an advertising agency that ran on caffeine and ego, and I thought falling in love meant finding. We got married 3 years later in a rooftop ceremony that looked beautiful in pictures but already felt too polished to be real. The city skyline behind us, the clink of glasses, everyone saying how perfect we looked. I believed them. Maybe I knew. The first cracks were small things, missed dinners, his phone face down on the table, the way he started showering as soon as he got home, even if it was just from the office. I told myself he was tired, that I was being paranoid. Everyone gets comfortable. Everyone changes. One night, around 1 a.m., I woke up and found him sitting in the kitchen with his laptop open, typing furiously. He didn't notice me at first. The light from the screen made him look younger, softer. I said his name, and he startled. "Couldn't sleep," he said, closing the computer too quickly. I didn't ask questions. That became my specialty, not asking questions. By the time I did, it was already too late. It started with a message. Not to me, of course. To her. I found it because of something stupid, a notification popping up while he was in the shower. Her name was Olivia. Just that. A message that said, "I can't stop thinking about last night." I didn't scream. I didn't even cry at first. I just stared at it, trying to understand how a sentence that small could shatter something that big. When he came out, towel around his waist, I asked, "Who's Olivia?" He froze. That was how I knew. Not the words that followed the "she's just a coworker," the "you're overreacting," but that half-second of panic before he could speak. That pause was the truth. I wish I could say I left then, that I was brave and furious and full of self-respect. But I stayed. Because love isn't a light switch, it's a slow dimming. You tell yourself there's more to know, that there's context, that maybe it wasn't what it looked like. For a while, he played the part. Flowers on a Tuesday, dinner reservations, the kind of apologies that sound rehearsed but still make you want to believe them. But something in me had already shifted. It's like realizing you've been holding your breath for months and finally exhaling, and all that's left afterward is the ache. The worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was how easily he returned to normal. How he could still laugh at his phone, still fall asleep beside me, still ask me to pass the salt at dinner like we hadn't burned down our marriage and kept eating in the ashes. And then, one evening, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I checked his messages again. Not because I wanted to find something, but because I already knew I would. There she was, Olivia, but this time it wasn't just her name. There were pictures, her handwriting on sticky notes, inside jokes, plans. I didn't recognize the man in those messages. He was warm, funny, attentive, the version of him I used to know. Except now he was giving it all to someone else. When I confronted him again, he didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He just looked tired and said, "I didn't think you'd ever find out." That was the moment I realized how small I'd become in my own life. He didn't think I'd ever find out. He said it like it was supposed to make me feel better, like his secrecy had been an act of mercy. I remember staring at him and thinking that maybe he believed it. Maybe, in his mind, lying was a way of loving, keeping the peace, sparing me the truth. I packed a bag that night. Not everything, just enough to make a point. I waited until he was in the shower again. How poetic, right? And then I zipped it up and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't want him to have that sound to hold against me later. I drove until the city lights blurred in my rearview mirror. Ended up at a cheap hotel with a flickering sign that read open 24 hours. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floral carpet, and it hit me that I hadn't cried yet. My body didn't seem to know what to do with itself. I texted my best friend, Mia. She called immediately, voice trembling with the kind of anger only someone who loves you can manage. "What the hell did he do?" she asked. And I told her, all of it. She offered to come over, but I said no. I didn't want witnesses to the collapse. I wanted to feel the wreckage alone. The next morning, Eric called. 12 times, I didn't answer. He texted once, just please. It's funny how one word can still hurt after everything. By day 3, I went back to the apartment. Not because I forgave him, but because it was still my home. He was there, sitting on the couch like he'd been waiting for a verdict. The air smelled like stale coffee and regret. I'll end it, he said before I even opened my mouth. It's over, I swear. Do you love her? I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than words ever could. He didn't answer, just buried his face in his hands. I think that's when I started to lose the version of myself who would have stayed. Something in me cracked cleanly in two, and instead of falling apart, I just went quiet. For weeks after, we lived like ghosts sharing a lease. He'd leave early, come home late. I'd pretend to sleep when he walked in. We were careful not to touch, not to speak too loudly, not to disturb the fragile truce that was really just denial in disguise. One night, Mia dragged me out for drinks. You need to breathe, she said. I didn't want to go, but I went anyway, because sitting at home meant sitting in the memory of him. That's where I met Daniel. He wasn't my type, not polished like Eric, not careful with his words. He was a photographer, the kind of man who looked at the world like he was always trying to memorize it. He asked if I was okay before he asked for my name. I lied and said yes. We talked until the bar closed. He walked me to my car, hands in his pockets like he was trying not to get too close. I liked that, the restraint. The next day, he texted, "You looked like someone who needed to be seen." I didn't respond, but I thought about it all day. By the end of that week, I had coffee with him. By the end of the month, I was lying to my husband. It didn't start as revenge. It started as breathing again. Daniel made me laugh, made me feel something that wasn't humiliation or anger. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being harmless. The first time he touched my hand across the table, I didn't pull away. The first time he kissed me, I didn't think about Eric at all. That's what scared me most, that I could betray him so easily after everything he'd done to me. But it didn't feel like betrayal then. It felt like survival. When Eric found out, because of course he did, it wasn't cinematic. No screaming, no tears, just silence. He looked at me the way I used to look at him, like I was someone he almost recognized. "I guess we're even," he said. Even, as if pain were a scoreboard, as if that made us whole. That night, I slept in the guest room. He didn't come after me. I think we both knew that was the end. For a few weeks after that, everything went strangely still. Eric and I moved around each other like polite strangers sharing a train compartment. The air between us felt used up. No more yelling, no more apologies, just the quiet sound of two people waiting for the other to blink first. Daniel called, texted, left voicemails. I couldn't answer. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was exhaustion. I'd spent so much time living inside lies that honesty suddenly felt too bright to stand in. One night I went for a walk down by the river. The city was half asleep, the water catching the yellow of the streetlights. I stood on the bridge and thought about everything that had happened, the messages, the affairs, the way love had turned into something that only knew how to wound. When I got home, Eric was sitting at the table. There was a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. He didn't look up when I came in. "Are you still seeing him?" I didn't answer. He nodded like that was enough. I kept thinking if I pretended long enough, we'd forget what we did to each other. He laughed once, bitter. But I can't even remember why I started anymore. The clock ticked in the silence. I could smell the rain coming through the cracked window. "I'm filing for separation," I said. My voice surprised me, steady, calm. He just said, "Yeah," and that was that. The next morning, I packed again, for real this time. I left the rings on the counter, next to his coffee mug. He didn't come out of the bedroom. I think he was pretending to sleep. I moved into a short-term rental with peeling wallpaper and a view of the alley. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first night alone, I sat on the floor eating takeout straight from the container, and for a moment I almost felt free. until the quiet settled in and I realized I'd built my life around noise. Daniel showed up a week later. He knocked once and then again, softer. "You disappeared," he said when I opened the door. I needed space. He looked at me for a long time, then stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He smelled like rain and darkroom chemicals. "I didn't want to be another mistake for you." "You weren't," I said, "but maybe I was for you." He shook his head. "You're not a mistake, you're just tired." I wanted to believe that, but tired people break things without meaning to. And I was so tired. We tried for a while. Dinners that ended in silence. Nights where he held me, but I was somewhere else entirely. He never said it out loud, but I could feel him slipping away, slowly, kindly, like someone leaving a room without turning off the light. The day he finally did, he left a note on my counter. "You deserve to be okay, even if it's not with me." I kept it in a drawer for months. After he left, I started walking again, miles at a time through the city, just to feel my body moving. I watched other people, couples arguing on corners, friends laughing too loud at bars, strangers brushing past each other without meaning anything by it. It made me feel both connected and invisible. Sometimes I thought about Eric. I heard he'd moved to another apartment across town. Sometimes I thought about Olivia too, wondering if they'd lasted, if they'd ruined each other like we had. But mostly, I thought about the quiet, how it used to scare me and now felt like the only honest thing left. One night, months later, I saw Eric by chance. It was at a grocery store. He was in line ahead of me, buying milk and cereal, looking older somehow. He saw me, smiled a little, and said, "Hey." "Hey." We stood there, two ghosts making small talk about weather and work, and it hit me how far apart we'd drifted. When he left with his bag, I almost called after him, but the words stuck. Maybe there wasn't anything left to say. Back at home, I sat by the window and watched the lights blink on across the buildings. The city hummed, endless and indifferent. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, making promises they might not keep. And for the first time, I didn't envy them. I made tea, turned off my phone, and let the night settle around me. Months slipped by without any real sense of time. I stopped counting days by weekends or holidays and started measuring them by the sound of the city outside my window. The trash truck in the mornings, the bar down the block closing at 2 a.m. I worked. I slept. I kept moving because stillness felt too much like memory. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and reach for someone who wasn't there. The air beside me would stay cool, and I'd lie there waiting for a heartbeat that never came. That's when it would hit me hardest. How much of love is just habit, and how hard it is to unlearn. Mia visited once. She said I looked better, but I could see the pity in her eyes. "You'll meet someone new," she told me, the way people do when they don't know what else to say. I nodded. I didn't tell her that the thought of starting over felt heavier than staying alone. Spring came late that year. One morning, the city smelled like rain and possibility, and for a second I almost believed I could feel hope again. I went out, walked without a plan, ended up near the river where Eric and I used to sit when things were still good. The benches were wet, the water high from melted snow. I watched a couple across the way, their heads bent together, laughing at something small. It was such an ordinary happiness that it made my chest ache. I stayed there until the light changed, until I couldn't tell whether the tears on my face were rain or memory. Back in my apartment, I stood by the window with the curtains open. The city was alive. Sirens, laughter, the endless hum, and for the first time I realized I didn't belong to any of it anymore. I'd spent so long trying to rebuild the ruins that I'd forgotten some things aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to be left standing as reminders. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor, the way I had that first night in the hotel. The glass trembled a little in my hand, but I wasn't afraid. There was nothing left to lose, and somehow that felt like peace. Later, when I finally went to bed, I left the window cracked open. The sound of the city drifted in soft, forgiving. I closed my eyes and let it fill the space where love used to live. Maybe that's all healing is, learning how to live with the echo. And as the night pressed in around me, I whispered to no one in particular, I'm still here,